Now, everything we've talked about up until this point having to do with the event viewer is awesome when you've only got one server under management. But if you're like me, you probably are responsible for more than just one server. And in fact, this introduces what has been one of the biggest complaints about the event viewer for a very long period of time, in that events get logged into the event log database on a single machine. If that event occurs on the machine, it goes in that machine's event log. And for a very long time, there was no way for you to consolidate event logs from multiple machines together. Well, back in the Windows Server 2008 days, Microsoft included this new feature called subscriptions into the event viewer. And subscriptions are a way for one computer, the collector, to collect the event logs from other computers, the forwarders, in order to consolidate all those logs into a single location. In order to create a subscription, you have to have a couple things in place first, not the least of which is WinRM. Now here in Windows Server 2012 R2, WinRM is probably configured already for you, but you do need to run WinRM quick config here on a machine in order to get all the various bits of WinRM prepared in order to turn on the next service that this whole event collections thing requires, which is the Windows Event Collector service. So punch in WinRM quick config on any machines participating in a subscription, and then right-click here on subscriptions to create a new subscription. As you'll see, you get an error message here that says, hey, to work with subscriptions, you have to turn on this Windows Event Collector service. You have to have it running. You have to have it configured to automatically start when the computer gets restarted. If you hit the Yes key here, this will go ahead and launch the new subscription properties screen you see here. Now it's here where we will define on the collector machine, the machine receiving the logs, what kinds of log events we're interested in and which computers we're interested in grabbing them from. So let's say, for example, that we want to grab all the event logs from all the domain controllers in our environment, and we're specifically interested in the security event logs. This has been a problem in the past because all those security events were logged individually to each domain controller, and being able to have a complete view of all the things going on in our domain required taking a look at all the logs on all the domain controllers. Let's create a subscription to actually gather all those logs into a single location. I'll call this DC security logs. And then the destination log that we'll use here will be the forwarded events logs, which is actually down here. You could, if you wanted, identify a different log, but this forwarded events log is typically the location where all these forwarded events get sent into when you create a new subscription. Now, skipping over our subscription type here for just a second, let's go down here to the events that we're interested in collecting. This brings up that same filter view that we looked at just a second ago. And let's assume, for example, that we are interested in the critical warning, the error, the information logs, all the events that can occur in specifically the event log, which is down here, the security event log. This will give us all the security events on the machine where we configure the subscription to gather those events from. So I'll come down here and choose OK to complete the query. And down here under Advanced is where I can choose a few additional settings for how I want to collect those events. The process of collecting events can actually require a lot of resources on the machine and also potentially over the network as well. And so you have some options here for determining the burstiness of when these events get transferred from the remote machine to this local machine. In certain circumstances, you may want those events over here as fast as possible, so you may want to minimize the latency of receiving the events. Alternatively, you may want to minimize the amount of bandwidth required to get the events over, so you might want to just send them in batches in order to minimize the bandwidth of a continuous connection. So you have some options here for essentially how you want to get those delivered from that remote location to here. You can also encrypt the information as it goes from that remote server over to here as well, if you change HTTP to HTTPS. So again, a couple of advanced subscription settings here that will come to play depending on the level of data you need to transfer from one server to another. Now, the biggest deal here has to do with how you actually go about determining which machines will be sending the data to this collector. The simplest but least flexible way is up here at the top, called collector initiated. Essentially what you're doing here is defining the specific computers that you want to connect to and request that log information from. So let's say, for example, that here for our domain computers, we want to add in the computer DC, which is our domain controller. If we click DC here and choose test, well, then we can see that we have a successful connectivity test to that machine DC. If I hit OK here and OK, this will begin the process of actually transferring that content from that remote machine here to this local collector. But whereas this is pretty cool when I've got a couple of known machines that I need to transfer log information from, it's not entirely very flexible as my environment grows and changes over time. And so for that reason, we have here another option titled Source Computer Initiated, which allows me to select computer groups that will be used to constrain which machines can participate in the subscription. So let's say, for example, I can add in domain computers here. I can punch in domain computers as the group of machines I'm interested in. Once I've done this, any machines that are a member of domain computers that then enable the connection here to this collector will automatically participate in the subscription. I can even add non-domain computers down here if I choose to add non-domain computers by fully qualified domain name, and then authenticate the connection using a certificate. Now, this first step in the process only identifies which machines could participate in the subscription. It doesn't actually identify which machines will participate. And in order to do that, we actually have to do some work here with group policy. So let me flip back over here to my domain controller so I can pull up the group policy management console and show you exactly what I'm talking about. Over here on this other computer, I'll pull up the GPMC, and just for the sake of argument, I'll pop open our default domain policy so that I can show you the group policy setting that determines which machines will then participate in the subscription. Here under policies and administrative templates here, I'm looking for Windows components and then event forwarding. It's here where I can configure the resource usage for the forwarder. So essentially how many events per second would be transferred from that forwarder to the collector. Or more importantly, I can here configure the target subscription manager, which essentially says, this is the machine that I would like to send my event log information to. This value has to be entered in kind of a weird way here. If you punch in the value, it will be server equals, and then the name of the computer. So file1.company.pri is the value you would choose here in order to configure this group policy object. With this complete, we need only to apply this group policy object to a container full of computers, and then have those computers auto-configure themselves to participate in the subscription. As you might imagine, considering how group policy works, this would be a very easy way for you to automatically configure, for example, all your domain controllers to forward their security event log information into a single location.